Okay, this is what I like to use as an alignment gauge. Basically two framing squares alongside C-clamp together so the widths of the outside edges are about the widths of the center of the tires. It so happens I lent a building square to a friend of mine and didn't get it back in a timely manner and bought another one. So anyway, they're cheap and it makes a nice solidly fixed width thing to use as a gauge. So what I'm going to do is take this, shove it under the machine, easier said than done. Like so, so that the squares are up against the back of the tires. And then I'll grab my handy dandy ballpoint pen and mark the treads. Slip my squares out of the way and roll the machine forward. There's the pen mark. Now we'll line up one edge with the pen. And we'll look on the other side. Grab a tape measure here. And then I can just measure from my mark over to my square. And turns out I'm a little over the 7/16 specification, but they give you a pretty wide range. I'm not going to bother adjusting it since I'm going to end up having to replace the tie rod ends anyway and resetting that. Anyhow, if you do have to adjust the alignment, remember that on the tie rod ends here, one end is left-handed thread and the other is right-hand thread. Also, it's important that you use two wrenches, one on the tie rod end and one on the lock nut, so as not to force the joint all the way over on its range of motion. And then you'd turn both tie rods an equal amount if you needed to tow it in or tow it out a little bit, and the handlebars are straight when the quad's running straight, and that way you'll maintain that relationship. If the handlebars aren't straight when the quad's running straight, you'll end up tweaking the tie rods a little bit and basically kind of trial and error to get that and then get it towed out the proper amount. One other thing, when you set those lock nuts on the tie rod, you want to make sure that you don't have one tie rod one way in its range of motion and the other way. You want basically when you've got both lock nuts tight to be able to grab that tie rod and rock it through a range of motion so that it can move as the suspension moves. So anyway, that's it for our suspension adjustment. So now we'll turn our attention to the cooling system. The cover in front of the steering here is just held on by rubber grommets. And a couple little prongs on the front, and that gives you access to the overflow bottle fill, and then under a rubber flap here is the radiator cap under the quad. Grab the camera and take a close look. Okay, the first time I tried to shoot this didn't turn out quite right. This rubber hose here hanging down from the quad is a weep hole for the water pump. Basically, it has a way for coolant to escape if the coolant side of the water pump seal, if that failed, it wouldn't push coolant into the engine oil and come out that hose instead. And then there on the water pump, hopefully you can see there's a plug there. One of the bolts there is by kind of a casting sticking out. Well, that's the drain for the engine coolant, so we'll pull that and drop the coolant out of the engine. Okay, we went ahead and drained all the coolant out of the water pump there. Then down here by the right side of the machine is the overflow bottle, and just pulled that hose off the bottom and drain that tank. Then it's just a matter of refilling them with coolant. And one of the other things I wanted to show you guys, don't have enough hands here to hold my light. On this side, we'll grab these two little clips here and squeeze them and release that. And then there's another pair up here. And just push them through that plastic panel. And as you go over here on the left side of the machine, inside this fender here alongside the radiator is a plastic panel that's held in by, come here, light, held in by a couple of these little Honda rivets there that you pull the centerpiece off and then just wiggle the rest of it out. And then you can pull the screen out that goes in front of the radiator in this side shroud. And the reason we do that is a lot of times if you have a Rincon that overheats, it's because crap has gotten in there between the oil cooler and the radiator. So once that's out of the way, you've got a better look to make sure everything's clean and all the fins are good, and get a good look at the coolant hoses and all that good stuff. One other thing I'd mention. This is what they call a tank saver. I think it's made by Camco, if I'm not mistaken. You'd find it in RV stores. Anyway, it makes a fantastic tool for spraying out, getting in there and getting all the junk out of that radiator. It's designed to stick in the drain hole or the hole for the anode rod in an RV water heater and squirt all the scale and stuff out of the tank. Works super for getting mud and stuff out of a ATV radiator. Okay, with the cooling system taken care of, I guess the thing we'll do next is the valves. Checking the valve gap isn't much of a big deal. It's getting all the body work in the tank and all that garbage out of the way so that you can actually get to the top of the engine head. That's sort of a pain. So this panel is rubber friction thing there, and a couple of spring clip, those little plastic rivets. There's a little plastic rivet down under there. Be a bolt under here. Couple of plastic rivets for the centerpiece of the tank and this front fender, and then there's a couple of little tabs there that engage in slots. Over on this side, another plastic rivet, and then two more plastic rivets. Another one up under here. Got a bolt here and a plastic clip here, and we'll be able to pull the gas cap here and get this stuff off, and then we'll end up having to deal with the air intake plumbing, and there's like a heat shield under there, and then we'll end up pulling the fuel tank to get at the top of the engine.